I'm going to talk today about alcohol fuels, and the reason this is such an important topic is if you look at the pollution map in large portions of the United States, the issue really is one of what do you do with oil-based pollution. I mean, in the state that I live in, California, oil pollution is 65% of all greenhouse gases and whooping 74% of total pollution. It's interesting that most of the foundations that are located in California spend most of their time dealing with coal pollution, including CO2 emission, and in California coal is 2% of emissions, and it's going down to 0 in next year. Also, oil is the most expensive of fuels, and although today oil price is temporarily, I think, depressed, we spend 6 times more on oil than on any other fuel. So in the United States, our oil bill is about $600 billion, but effectively to consumer is about $780 billion by the time you add taxations and other type of expenses related to our fuel consumption. So of course, the first thing that when I talk to people about replacing oil, what comes to mind is solar and wind. The big problems is that we fuel our cars with liquid fuels. Solar and wind produce, of course, electricity. These two markets are non-fungible. Hence, solar and wind are not really the effective immediate solution for our oil consumption, both in terms of price and in terms of pollution. So here are all the alternatives that we have to look at. You know, we can increase the efficiency of cars, we can go to public transportation, we can tax carbon, we can go to electrification, or we can go to alternative fuels and a mix of the above. So of course, you know, we all know that Obama passed the new CAFE standard, the corporate fuel economy standard, and indeed we're expecting fuel economy to start rising, is already rising, and we expect this rise to accelerate. The question one have to ask oneself is, when you get up to these levels here, what will be the main drivers of acceleration, absent people, you know, abandoning the pickup truck? And when you look up here, you know, in the automotive industry, the answer to that is we must have higher octane fuels in order to be able to really ramp up this kind of miles per gallon improvements, or actually gallons per mile improvements. Of course, the other one is public transportation. Unfortunately, we have a very large sprawling country with huge space between centers. And yes, in cities, there's lots of room for public transportation. We are seeing this with the project like the light rail system in Denver, which is beautiful, but it's not yet occupied. But over time, I believe that this behavior will change when the availability is there and the cost is lower. However, if you think about nationwide, the public transportation, I think, will remain a niche solution. How about taxation? What happened if we tax carbon? Well, kind of we ran this experience in effect. When the Oslo Accord was signed in 1997, you know, oil was below $20 a barrel. Since then, oil went up by 400%. Okay, one would think that if something price went up by 400%, we are going to see huge decline in demand, right? But instead, what we are seeing is a 22% rise in global oil demand at the same time frame. And of course, people here talked about the industrialization and urbanization of China is one of the biggest drivers here. But this is true throughout the world as well. But what else ever happened? What happens when the price of oil or energy went up by such rapid amount? So this is what happened in the United States. In the late 1980s, there were about 18 million Americans on food stamps, and there were lots of articles about how bad that is. But here we are today, almost 50 million Americans on food stamps. This is the manifestation of the sentence that increase of price of energy is a regressive tax. When we say regressive tax, that's what we mean. Okay, so the cost is the low income people are the one that gets affected the most. And the reason is simple. Because if you think about your employment opportunity as the distance that you can drive to get a job, if the price of gasoline goes up from $2 a gallon to $4 a gallon, your distance halves and your job opportunity goes down by 75%. And if your income is limited by your education and your talents, okay, there is not much you can do. And that's why unemployment at places that are further away from the center is very, very high. And then, of course, this brings us to the political arena, which is a policy issue. Elections in the United States are decided by, on average, 6.3 million people, and some of the recent elections by even smaller numbers. So then when you have about 50 million people on food stamps, and now the question asks, can I raise the price of their living? You know, and it only takes a very small minority of them to vote one way or another to change the president. You can see how toxic this topic is. So how about electrification? Well, I drive an electric car. Actually, I have now 3 electric cars because my daughter is now driving a Volt. This Tesla here is the 17th Tesla of the production line, the S. This is my son. I love him. I love my cars. So once you drive an electric car, you never go back to a gasoline car. You know, when I rent cars, the driving experience of electric car is so superior that with the exception of the little thing called range anxiety, which once you get used to driving an electric car, you lose that range anxiety, that I believe that the long-term solution is for sure electric drive, okay, or some kind of a hybrid electric drive. But even if we assume a really strong penetration rate of electric cars, okay, we have an install base of 250 million vehicles in this country. And although this install base is kind of stable, the rotation rate is becoming longer and longer because the cars last longer and longer. Think about your own experience. You know, the cars you buy today, you don't really need to change them every 3 to 5 years like you used to in the 80s. So even if we look at this 33% acceleration rate, exponential growth in new cars that are electric cars, what does that eventually translate to is a very small 4 to 5% penetration of electric cars into the existing car markets. And also, of course, there are the 3 big inhibitors. Okay, the supply chains of batteries. This is why Elon Musk is building an $8 billion battery facility. And he says that he needs about 100 of them to become an effective global automotive power. The second thing is we still don't have a good replacement for the pickup truck. So if you think about the total cars that David was showing before, 250,000 cars, electric cars in the United States and hybrids. It's about 1 month worth of F-150 sales, pickup truck. Okay, this is all the electric cars sold so far. So we still don't have a good solution for the pickup truck industry, which is about more than half the cars sold in this country. And the third, of course, there's a very large part of the population that does not park their car in the garage. Garage is for the junk. The car parks in the street. So when your car parks in the street, it's difficult to get electric charge into it, and particularly if you live in a place where the weather has a lot of precipitation, there are some safety and other issues. Which brings us to alternative fuel. So in order for alternative fuel to be relevant, and this is where all these graphs that you've seen today actually bring down, okay, the existing infrastructure is so big that to make any dent based on replacement takes many, many decades. So in order for the fuels to be relevant, okay, you have to ask these 3 questions. So how long it's going to take to make an impact, whether this fuel can compete with oil in the marketplace without government subsidies, because for something to last for long enough time, it needs to go through multiple political cycles. And you know, can we make replacement fuels that are better than oil, both for the environment and for the consumer? So the experience in buying them will be better. So the key is this: you have to be able to make fuels on cars that drove you here today. Because we can't wait for the car fleet to turn over. Okay? When are you going to buy this little tiny car that GM has developed? So we have a solution. Alcohol fuels can work on existing cars. As a matter of fact, they are very good fuels. They are high-octane fuels. They're used today in racing, and they can work in your car. And I'll show you in a minute how. But the beauty of alcohol fuel is you can make them for many different feedstocks. Okay, so of course we know you can make it from corn, you can make it from anaerobic biodigesters, you can make them from trash, but the topic today is one of natural gas. But when I say natural gas, doesn't mean fracking. And this, I get this question all the time when I do this presentation to people. In people's mind, fracking is some kind of an incarnation of an evil industry taking over the earth. Okay? So here's the realization. Fracking today is a oil and gas industry standard. So 90% of new spuds today for oil is fracking. And the other 10% is marginal oil off the continental shelf and other places like that. And so when people say fracking for gas, they have to ask themselves this question. The car that drives them here today, if the gasoline in that car today did not come from fracking, there is a very good chance that over the next 10 years, most of this fuel will come from fracking. So if we stay where we are already in fracking. However, a side effect of fracking for oil is natural gas. And it's a lot of natural gas and natural gas liquids. So today, this natural gas is a waste product to the oil industry. And if you talk to the oil majors, not majors, but the big companies in the space, for them, natural gas is a headache, particularly because new regulations now will require them to take care of it more and more. And you can see it because they flare it. And one of the main reasons they flare it, by the way, is because the natural gas liquids, they don't fit the specs of natural gas piping, which I'm going to talk about in a minute as well. Alcohol fuels are better for the environment for many different reasons. They dissolve in water and they're biodegradable, so no more big spills. They reduce smog because there's no partial burning, it's small molecule fuels. They can replace aromatics in gasoline, which are octane enhancers, but also non-carcinogenic and neurotransmitter, neurodevelopment inhibitors. High octane means high efficiency engines, and that's really a key to improvement that comes from alcohol fuels. Alcohol fuels can introduce a new paradigm to achieve lower greenhouse gas emissions, and I'm going to address this in a minute, and many possibility for renewable resources. So once natural gas-based alcohol fuel can break the market open and every car can take every alcohol fuel, then in effect, producers that want to produce alcohol fuel from renewable sources can start producing into that market. MIT have done a study about all the possibilities of alcohol fuels, and there are many great enhancements from a high compression engine to improve times in the sparking and many other features that can be added, including things that can be added to existing engines. So in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, this is how I see the future, where just by adopting alcohol fuels, particularly if we had some renewable in the mix like we have today, we can already reduce emissions. But as we keep increasing the efficiency of products in that area, including things you can add to your car today, we can dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions to get to the point that now it starts to compete favorably with the kind of things we would see with electric cars. But people say, look, when I drive my pickup trucks on ethanol fuel, E85, I get lousy performance, and it's true, you do. But the reason is because your alcohol fuel car today, your flexible fuel car today is really tuned to run on gasoline. And the alcohol tune is terrible. So by us hacking into your car, tuning it to run specifically on alcohol fuel, still fuel flexible, just improving the ignition of your engine to fit the characteristics of E85, and particularly not cert fuel, but actual fuel today sold in stores, we can get about 20 to 25% fuel economy on existing cars, improvement when working on E85. And how difficult it is to do? It's pretty easy. Most cars that drove you here today are already flexible fuel enabled. In the early 2000s, the car companies realized that the big growth opportunity is going to be not in the United States, but in other emerging markets like China, Brazil, Indonesia, and places like this. As a result, they moved to something called the international platform or the global platform. And that platform had to be able, basically the premise was that we can take production from any place in our supply chain and adopt it, the parts, in any part of our manufacturing process. So for that, they had to isolate the fuel formulation from the engine. And that's exactly what they did. Almost every single car company did that. As such, the fuel burning characteristic is determined by software and not by the engine design. So by simply updating the software, and in some cases it's updating just turning on a feature, you can convert the car that you drive today to run on alcohol fuel, and we can tune them to run even better on alcohol fuel. So what's the economy of this transition? It's the spread. In the United States, in the last 4 or 5 years, we sold about $400 billion worth of gasoline. If we do simple energy conversion, we can replace all of that stuff with about $80 billion of natural gas. Now, of course, when you convert natural gas to alcohol, and particularly to methanol, then you lose efficiency. So let's even assume that you lose half the value of your feedstock. So you will need $160 billion to replace $400 billion of gasoline. That's a $240 billion arbitrage. Let's put this in perspective. Walmart profit last year was $15 billion globally. This is a gigantic business opportunity, and it will happen. This will happen. Once opening up the fuel to competition in the car can happen on your cars. Now, if you replace natural gas with ethane, okay, then the number there from 80 billion goes down to 20 billion. Because ethane right now is about $25 a gallon, 25 cents a gallon. It's a waste product. You don't need to convert it. You can just run it in canisters, in steel canister in the car. So there's no loss in conversion. So, and by the way, in the back end, we are producing more energy from ethane. 40% of between 35 to 40% of the NGL content is ethane. It has 4 times more energy than the 50% that is methane. Right, so we are producing more energy in ethane than we are producing methane when we are talking about associated gas. And more, that's what we are going to talk about in the United States. So the opportunity is even bigger spread on the ethane. The blockage, of course, is the technology to do conversions, and the issue is EPA regulation for conversions have never taken into account that technology can be used to make these conversions. And my last comment, I encourage everybody to go see the movie Pump, which tells the history of our love affair with cars and paves the road of how to move forward. Thank you.